Hi, I'm Wendy Turner, Executive Director of Michigan Public. You might have heard that public media is under threat. You're not wrong. But I come to tell you that your voice has power. Visit protectmypublicmedia.org, contact your lawmakers, and take a stand today.
From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
If you ask Americans if they're concerned that there will be fraud in this year's election, a majority will say yes. That's according to new polling out from NPR, PBS News and Marist. And if you break it down by party, 86% of Republicans say they're concerned. 33% of Democrats say they are.
The Democracy Defense Project is trying to find some answers about what can be done to shore up in voters' minds that elections in the United States are safe and secure. And they're paying particular attention to swing states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia.
And here in Michigan, a bipartisan odd couple of sorts is taking up the mantle. They are former Michigan governors, Democrat Jim Blanchard and Republican John Engler. They will be joining us shortly. But first, we're going to dig into new polling results from that very group, the Democracy Defense Project. They found that a majority of voters would have confidence in election results if there were certain safety practices in place, including things like securing paper ballots and cleaning up voter rolls. Here's the thing, though. Those things in Michigan, they're already in place. Colin Jackson is Capitol reporter for the Michigan Public Radio Network and dug into the data. Hi, Colin.
Hey, Zoe. Hey, Rick.
Hey.
So tell us a little bit about this poll.
This was a poll done through the Glengarriff Group. Richard Schuba, the founder of the Glengarriff Group, when he was going through these results, he had noted that the partisan breakdown, it was a vast majority of Democrats and would-be Harris voters said that, yes, they're going to trust the results of this election. A lot fewer of that number when it came down to Trump voters. I want to say it was a little over 60% of Trump voters said the same thing. Within that, they also asked about what were some of the main concerns of voters. These were things like foreign interference or people who may not be otherwise eligible to vote trying to cast a ballot. And you saw the differences and concerns breaking down by party, too.
So as part of this work that the pollster, Rich Schuba, a friend, a guest of It's Just Politics, we love his brain, what he did was he surveyed voters and then said, if you knew that we did this, insert security measure here, if you understood that clerks did X, Y, Z, would you trust elections more? What did he find?
There were 12 different election measures, and these are things like testing voting machines before using them to count election results, storing and locking paper ballots in secure manner, and making sure that the chain of custody for those paper ballots is documented. Things like making sure election machines aren't connected to the internet. When surveyed and said, okay, if we do all 12 of these things, what he found was confidence in election results shot up to nearly 95%. But the issue is all of these things are already in place in Michigan, either through statute or just through policy. So from there, it's a matter of educating the public. And that this now becomes a matter of public education to let them know, hey, these things that you said would make you feel secure in election results are already happening. So therefore, maybe you should feel secure in election results.
So, Colin, when you look at all this, what's one takeaway?
I think it just shows how little information people have about the election and election security. I think the other side of it, though, how hard it is to unlearn misinformation. You can see that elections and election integrity have become major talking points throughout these last few election cycles. And these are questions and really unfounded claims about voter fraud. When voter fraud, we know from both cases being pursued and just data that's been collected from group upon group, that voter fraud is a relatively small issue. But yet these rumors about dead people voting, people double voting, undocumented folks voting, look, 4 years later, there's still a large chunk of the population that believes former President Donald Trump won the 2020 election. He did not. And there was dozens, if not hundreds of audits around the country that proved he did not win the 2020 election. There's dozens of audits here in Michigan that proved that. And yet people still feel like the election was stolen. And you can present them with all sorts of truth and data and everything else. But it's a way of communicating that truth in a way that people understand, I think, is the hard part.
Colin Jackson, Capitol reporter for the Michigan Public Radio Network. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So let's turn now to two former governors who are part of the Democracy Defense Project. They're trying to change the narrative, trying to get folks to have confidence in elections. They are Democrat Jim Blanchard and Republican John Engler. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This, of course, is such a large issue in our culture in the United States. What can any one governor do about it? Governor Blanchard, I'll start with you.
Well, here we are, former governors. We have a lot of experience with elections in Michigan. We believe elections here are fair, accurate, secure, transparent, and they have been for many, many years. And I think by the nature of our group, which is bipartisan, we hope to help instill greater credibility into the Michigan election system.
Who's your audience in this?
We want to make sure that those who question it or dream up stuff or engage in conspiracies are repudiated and vigorously. But also, we can underscore, along with the 83 county clerks, over 1,500 city and township clerks, that there are a lot of procedures that make sure our elections are fair and accurate.
It was interesting. What the pollster did was he gave to voters who responded to this survey a number of different kinds of procedural and very practical legal steps. If they were in place, if voters knew that you were going to have none of these machines that people vote on connected to the internet, if they knew that there was a way to double check, is the person casting the ballot actually entitled to cast the ballot? Are there ways to validate that the number of ballots cast matching the number of signatures in the poll book? I won't go through all of the steps, but you get the point. If they understood some of these precautions were in place, their confidence in the election soars, and that's even among the most ardent Trump supporters. We can't rebut everything that's out there on social media. It's rife with conspiracy theory, but we can talk to you about why some of these theories don't bear out when you test it against what the reality is.
When people go to vote, they're dealing with local citizens, at the city clerk or the voting precinct. They're dealing with their own fellow citizens. Thousands of people volunteer on these elections. And so a lot of people are apt to trust their own local voting, but not somebody else's.
Governor Engler, you said we can't rebut everything. So what's the entree message to the people who most need to hear it?
Well, I think, frankly, we're pleased to do this interview with you folks today because it's a way for us. Somebody will hear this and say, oh, wait a minute, I didn't know that. I think it is just an onslaught of information and appearances on our part urging the traditional media, especially the broadcast media, which, they're making millions and millions of dollars off these campaigns. They could spend a little time with news coverage going out and interviewing these local clerks that Jim talked about. Most people, they don't know the ins and outs, the intricacies, the checks and the safeguards that are there. And, candidates themselves, we've seen it most notably with the Republican candidate for president in 2020, wasn't very happy about his outcome, didn't complain so much in 2016 when he won. But even there, he had some criticisms of the process. I do think one thing, Rick, that's different this time in 2024 just has to do with the environment. The governor kind of referenced that, but if you think back 4 years ago to a presidential election, it was COVID. So many things were different, and people were hearing different things about changes that had been made, when ballots could be cast, how late those ballots could arrive, and there was all kinds of an uproar. You as reporters and Jim and I as both candidates, people involved in politics for a long time, the changes were coming pretty fast, but they were happening in different ways in different states. I don't think it was surprising that people were hearing things and getting a little bit, wait a minute, what's going on here? Why are they doing this? We're back to a much more normal time, albeit, as we've been discussing, you now have this early voting period. You can vote early in person. You can actually register to vote on election day. So some things have changed about the process. But there's really two parts to this. One is that people who are legally entitled to vote should be the ones that vote. And then once everybody's cast those ballots, they ought to be counted accurately, fairly, with transparency, so that people say, well, yeah, they counted all the votes. They didn't count the ones that were for my opponent, and they didn't count my votes. No, they counted all the votes. And if you want to guarantee a win, go out and work hard and get more votes. That's the way you win elections.
I also think that you're right, Governor Engler, about some of the new processes. And it was easy for people who may be suspicious of government in the first place to worry about accuracy and fairness. In Michigan, I think there were over 2 million plus votes by mail that went for Joe Biden. And
yeah, it was huge. It was huge. And I think the Trump campaign made a big mistake 4 years ago. And certainly I would say the pros in the Republican Party were, even 4 years ago, were stop saying that, and after the fact have told a lot of people what a mistake. And naturally, I guess maybe not naturally, but at least this time around, vote early is the saying.
Governor Engler, you mentioned 2020. You mentioned former President Donald Trump. The so-called big lie that election 2020 was somehow stolen has morphed into language, and language that we've heard just in the past few weeks from the chair of the Michigan Republican Party, Pete Hoekstra. He said, quote, "We're afraid that they will steal some votes to make sure that he doesn't win." The they being Democrats, and the he in this case being U.S. Senate candidate Mike Rogers. What does language like that do to your message of election integrity?
Well, actually, we don't know what the chairman said, because that purportedly was some tape in a private session. It was something he didn't say in public. And in the same article, I criticized that article, both the reporter that wrote the story and the headline writer. In the story, Senate candidate Mike Rogers said, look, there are vigorous process to check elections and election integrity efforts, and he's very confident it's going to be a fair election. That should have been the story. Here's a Senate candidate running in a hotly contested seat saying, I think it's going to be a fair election, but that was buried, was the very last paragraph of the story. Let's talk about the president. So Pete Hoekstra, I think, got a bum rap in that story, and of course, based on a tape that nobody's heard. And he wasn't talking, in my view, about the election itself. He was talking about when you have close elections, have recounts. And gosh, Governor Blanchard and I we kind of a little bit of wonkish on some of this stuff. But I mean, you go back to Robert Caro's books talking about Lyndon Johnson's early elections down in Texas, or the legend around the Kennedy-Nixon race, all the way back in 1960. There's all kinds of then I want to die in Chicago so I can continue to stay politically active. There's a lot of jokes. It's just political. Some of it's political banter. Some of it has some basis in fact. But I think President Trump got awfully serious about this, and he didn't win Michigan in 2020. I looked at those numbers. When you look at Trump, what happened is that his margin that carried him to a narrow victory in 2016 in Michigan evaporated, and he lost Oakland County by something like 55,000 more votes, Kent County by 35,000 more votes, and that's why he didn't win Michigan.
But this is what the chairman said. Folks hear about this, and does this add one more wound to this concern that folks have about election integrity if the chair of the party is saying that? I think it does.
I mean, because that kind of a story, especially the headline, because there was nothing even in the article that suggested that Hoekstra was talking about 2020. I mean, he was looking ahead. He wasn't talking back. But the story left a very false impression. And I guess I would say that there's a lot of stuff that's been done that we think is very helpful and ought to be very reassuring to all voters, whether they're for Trump or Harris, or they're not voting in the presidential election, they're just voting for local people.
It's an abnormal time. We haven't had somebody running for president who claimed they won the last election when they didn't. We haven't had someone running for president who was selected a month before the party convention. Here we are. So some kook can come along and say the elections are rigged. And our job here, myself and Governor Engler and others, is to push back vigorously that our elections are accurate, safe, secure, transparent. And it's a disservice to our fellow citizens to suggest otherwise.
You guys ran against each other. One of you won. The other accepted the result. Governor Blanchard, I think that your final words as you were leaving the inauguration ceremony to Governor Engler was, "Do well, my friend." Is that tradition in jeopardy
look, Donald Trump did not attend the inauguration of Joe Biden, but he's still claiming he won that election. Even the first election that he won fair and square because of the Electoral College, he couldn't accept the fact that he lost the popular vote. So it's hard when you have a leader like that making those kind of statements. They're already talking about the election being rigged. And J.D. Vance flunked the test. He did a credible job in that debate. He was calm and collected and polished. And at the end, he blew it by not being willing to admit that Joe Biden had won the previous election. So they could help us out a little bit. But the election is likely to be very close. I think whatever transition there is, either Biden to Harris or oh, God forbid, in my opinion, Biden to Trump, I think it'll be a reasonably smooth transition. There may be a lot of unhappy people, but it will be smooth.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there'll be a lot of unhappy people, and I sure hope it'll be smooth. And I hope, Rick, that tradition is not gone. I mean, we've seen, there are plenty of examples, unfortunately, on both sides. I mean, none as prominent, I think, as President Trump. I mean, he certainly should have attended the inauguration. I think that is an important signal globally. And we can fight about politics, we can fight about policy, you fight in the election, but once they're over, somebody's won the election, they have to be able to attempt to govern. They have to be able to put a coalition together. And frankly, they have to be able to work across the aisle to some extent. We're in a period where government's going to be probably divided, if not divided, very closely. Look at the Michigan legislature, 56, 54 in the House, 2018 in the Senate. Doesn't get any closer than that, I guess, until it's tied. So we have so much at stake. And so what I think we all feel very keenly is we don't want to get tied down into questioning legitimacy of the way in which we select or elect our leaders at the expense of understanding what it is leaders do once they're in offices and trying to represent and serve the public.
That is former Michigan Republican Governor John Engler and former Michigan Democratic Governor Jim Blanchard. Thanks to you both.
Well, thank you for giving us the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So here's the thing. When you get two governors together, they tend to want to talk and reminisce. And as political journalists, we just will take every opportunity when you've got that in front of you. So I couldn't help keeping them on the line and asking, okay, final question. Are you both ready? Because it's only a one-word answer. If you could, would you run for governor again?
No.
I think not. I mean, I've had plenty of time to be governor, no. And I couldn't win in this environment.
Yeah, it's so
different.
I belong to another era.
Yeah. This year just take the Michigan House of Representatives. I'm told by people that are much closer to this than I am that, Jim, your party, the Democratic Party, will spend all sources over $50 million. It used to be they thought the Republicans were the fat cats. We're the country mice. We're impoverished these days. $50 million on the Michigan House of Representatives. Now that story is unreported because, again, Rick, I mean, there's nobody's got any column inches they can devote to it, and nobody's really got time to write the story. But that is a staggering sum. But and we don't need to say that. We've got Senate races out there. I mean, Governor Blanchard, I'm more familiar than I am on some of these, but some of these Senate races are, hell, they're $100 million races, aren't they? I mean, they're
absolutely. Of course, I hated raising money, so I wouldn't be a good candidate because I really didn't enjoy raising money. I spent very little time at it. Today, the attitudes are so negative. I have a high regard for quality people who run. Yeah. I really do. And so when I see Republicans who are good, I'll say nice things about them. I work with some, actually. And of course, with the Democrats, I want to see good people. I don't like protest candidates or the conspiracy wing of either party. It's a lot harder. It's amazing we have the quality that we do in some respects, given the obstacles to winning and running. I think it's really, really tough. And I'm spending my time trying to help worthy candidates, but I would want to go through with they do.
Boy, I agree with that completely. And the voters actually, there's a little bit of a way of them sensing this if they're given the choices. I mean, because we've seen Republican primary voters take out a couple of these. I guess they call themselves the Freedom Caucus. I don't know if they still use that down there, but there's a fellow in Virginia lost his primary. You got a couple. Bowman up in New York lost his primary on the Democratic side. So these far extremes who won't work with anybody, they I wish they were from another era, not today's era. But we need to get back to, and I didn't serve in Congress. Governor Blanchard did, but Mike Bishop talks about it. I mean, you had relationships that went across the political aisle. There were issues where people worked together, and they got things done. And that's really, really tough right now.
When I was in Congress, I never campaigned against a Republican sitting member in Michigan, nor did I as governor, even though I thought some of them were a little too far right, although actually the party then was a more moderate party. I never campaigned. And I remember Guy Vanderjagt always thanking me. I said, Guy, you're a good guy. Why would I? It hurts my credibility to be campaigning against you. So, yeah, I enjoyed campaigning, by the way. I found it fun. And I must say, it's one of the reasons I like Kamala Harris, because she really does look like she's having a good time. Usually the person that's having a good time wins, I might add, but that's to be decided.
I really did get the sense that if they had the time, the governors would have continued reminiscing and talking a lot about the days that were. A reminder that you can get the It's Just Politics newsletter, the new It's Just Politics newsletter, in your inbox every Friday afternoon. Sign up at the website michiganpublic.org. And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.